You're pregnant." The words hung between them like shattered glass. Alara's hand trembled as she gripped the pregnancy test, 4 pink lines screaming the impossible truth. The Manhattan skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows behind the man she thought she knew, the man who'd told her stories on park benches while wearing torn jeans and a threadbare jacket. Now he stood in a $3,000 suit, cologne replacing the scent of street coffee she'd grown to love. "Say something, Kaylin." Her voice cracked. "Or should I call you Mr. Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries? Which name do you prefer when you're not pretending to be homeless?" His jaw tightened. Those storm-gray eyes that had captivated her for 6 months now held the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. "Alara, don't." She pressed her free hand against her still flat stomach, where 4 tiny heartbeats would soon flutter. "Just don't." 6 months. 6 months of lies while I fell in love with fiction. The feelings were never fiction. He stepped forward. She stepped back, her heel catching on the Persian rug. "Which feelings? The ones where you let me buy you coffee because I thought you couldn't afford it? The ones where I cried in your arms about my father's bankruptcy while you sat on billions? I wanted to tell you." "When?" The word ripped from her throat. "Before or after you got me pregnant with quadruplets?" "Yes, Kaylin. 4. 4 babies growing inside me right now, fathered by a stranger." His face was drained of color. For the first time since she'd stormed into his real office, not the community center where he'd volunteered, she saw genuine shock fracture his composed mask. 4? The word came out strangled. "The fertility treatments I mentioned? The ones I was doing alone because I thought I'd never find someone?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Turns out they work really well when combined with the CEO of a pharmaceutical empire. Did you know that when you were researching your role? Or was getting close to the daughter of your biggest competitor just a bonus?" "Stop." His voice turned to steel, the homeless storyteller's gentle tone vanishing completely. "Whatever else you think, never doubt that I love you." "Love?" She threw the pregnancy test at him. It bounced off his chest, clattering onto the marble floor. "You don't destroy someone you love. You don't let them share their deepest fears while hiding your entire existence. I was trying to protect you. From what? From knowing my boyfriend could afford prenatal care? From realizing the man I made love to had a bed bigger than my entire apartment?" He moved faster than she expected, catching her shoulders with gentle hands that felt like betrayal. "From the world that destroyed your father. From the vultures who would use you to get to me. From becoming another casualty in a war you didn't start." "I'm already a casualty." Tears burned down her cheeks. "I'm pregnant with 4 babies whose father I don't even know. The man I thought I knew doesn't exist. He does." His thumbs brushed her tears, a gesture so familiar it shattered her remaining defenses. "The man who held you during thunderstorms, who learned your coffee order, who fell asleep listening to your heartbeat, that was me. The only lie was my name and my money." "Only?" She wrenched away from his touch. "Those aren't small lies, Kaylin. Those are the foundations of who you are." "No." His voice dropped to the intimate whisper she recognized from countless nights. "The foundation of who I am is the man who loves you, who loves our—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Our 4 children." The possessive claim in his voice sent conflicting waves of fury and longing through her. How dare he claim them? How dare he not? "I need to leave." She backed toward the door, one hand protectively covering her stomach. "I need to think. Alara, please. Let me explain everything. Let you what? Spin more stories? You're good at those." She reached for the door handle, pausing to deliver one final blow. "I just have one question, Kaylin. In all your elaborate deception, was anything real? Or was the homeless man's greatest story the one where he made me believe in love?" The anguish that crossed his face almost made her stay. "Almost. If you've ever wondered whether love can survive deception, keep watching. This story will change how you see second chances. And if you believe true love conquers all, Hit that like button now and subscribe to Rich Billionaire Romance Stories for more heart-stopping tales. The morning sun filtered through the windows of petals and dreams, casting golden streaks across buckets of fresh roses and baby's breath. Elara Martinez wiped her hands on her apron, inhaling the sweet fragrance that had become her daily comfort. At 28, she'd built a quiet life around simple pleasures, the satisfaction of arranging perfect bouquets, the joy on customers' faces, the peaceful rhythm of tending to living beauty. Her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord about next month's rent increase. Again. She sighed, calculating numbers that never seemed to add up right. The flower shop barely broke even most months, but it was hers. After watching her father, construction empire, crumble under corporate sabotage 3 years ago, owning something, anything, felt like victory. "Elara, I need 24 white roses for the Morrison wedding," called Mrs. Chen from the front counter. "And make them perfect. You know how particular she gets." On it, Elara selected the finest stems, her practiced hands working quickly. Each rose had to be flawless, each leaf positioned just so. Perfection in small things. That's what kept her grounded when everything else felt uncertain. The bell above the door chimed as she finished the arrangement. Through the window she spotted him again, the man who'd been sitting on the bench across the street for the past week. Tall, lean, with dark hair that caught the light and clothes that had seen better days. He always carried a worn leather journal and seemed to watch the world with the intensity of someone collecting stories. Today something was different. He wasn't writing. Instead, he sat perfectly still, staring at nothing with hollow eyes that made her chest tighten with unexpected concern. Without thinking, she grabbed 2 cups from the break room and filled them with the hot cocoa she kept warming on the small burner. Her grandmother's recipe, rich, comforting, with a hint of cinnamon that could chase away any chill. "I'll be right back," she told Mrs. Chen, stepping outside before she could second-guess herself. The October air bit at her cheeks as she crossed the street. Up close, she could see the careful mending in his jacket, the way his shoes were polished despite their age. Pride, she recognized. The kind that kept you dignified even when the world tried to strip it away. "Excuse me." Her voice came out softer than intended. "You look like you could use something warm." He glanced up, and she nearly stepped back at the intensity in his storm-gray eyes. For a moment, she saw something raw and vulnerable before his expression shifted to polite surprise. "That's very kind, but I couldn't. It's just cocoa." She held out the cup, steam rising between them. "My grandmother always said hot chocolate was the universal language of comfort. Besides, I made too much. A lie, but a gentle one." His fingers brushed hers as he accepted the cup, and she felt an unexpected jolt of warmth that had nothing to do with the cocoa. "Thank you." His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, cultured, educated, at odds with his appearance. "I'm Kaylin, Elara." She settled beside him on the bench, cradling her own cup. "I own the flower shop across the street. I've seen you here all week. I hope I'm not disturbing anyone. I find this spot peaceful." She studied his profile, the strong jaw, the way his eyes tracked the pedestrians with genuine interest rather than judgment. "What do you write about?" "Stories." He opened his journal, revealing pages of neat handwriting. "Everyone who passes has one." The businessman checking his phone might be calling his daughter for the first time in months. The woman with the red umbrella could be on her way to a job interview that will change her life. "And what's my story?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Kaylin turned to face her fully, those gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. The flower girl who sees beauty in broken things and believes kindness can heal the world. She carries her grandmother's wisdom in her heart and her father's strength in her hands. She's building something beautiful from the pieces life left her. The accuracy of his observations stole her breath. How could you possibly know that? The way you arranged those roses in the window, each one positioned to catch the light perfectly, even the ones with slightly damaged petals. The fact that you brought cocoa to a stranger because you saw sadness in his eyes. The small calluses on your hands that speak of honest work. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Stories are written in details most people miss. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up around them. Alara found herself stealing glances at this mysterious man who saw too much and spoke like poetry. "What's your story?" she asked finally. Something flickered across his features. Pain, regret, something deeper. A man who lost his way and is trying to remember who he used to be. We all get lost sometimes. She surprised herself with the admission. After my father's business failed, I felt like I was drowning. The flower shop saved me, gave me purpose again. What happened to his business? Corporate warfare. Bigger companies with deeper pockets and fewer scruples. Bitterness crept into her voice. They destroyed him systematically. Stole contracts, spread rumors, buried him in legal fees until he had nothing left. He died of a heart attack. 6 months later. Kalen's hand tightened around his cup. "I'm sorry. That's unconscionable. It's the world we live in. The powerful crush the powerless, and the rest of us just try to survive." She shook her head, forcing brightness back into her tone. "But enough about that. Tell me one of your stories. A happy one." For the next hour, Kalen wove tales that made her laugh and gasp, and lean closer without realizing it. He spoke of star-crossed lovers reuniting at train stations, of children finding magic in ordinary moments, of second chances that bloomed like flowers after winter. When she finally had to return to work, she felt lighter than she had in months. "Will you be here tomorrow?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Would you like me to be?" The hope in his voice made her heart flutter. "I make really good cocoa." As she walked back to the shop, Alara caught her reflection in the window and barely recognized the woman smiling back at her. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the stirring of something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. "When was the last time you showed kindness to a stranger? What happened?" 3 weeks into their daily cocoa meetings, November arrived with a bitter wind that cut through the city like a blade. Alara watched from her shop window as Kalen hunched deeper into his thin jacket, his breath forming white clouds as he wrote in his journal. The sight made her chest ache. That evening she stayed late at the shop, working on a wedding order while her mind wandered to storm-gray eyes and stories that made her forget the world's harshness. When she finally locked up, she found Kalen still on his bench, shoulders rigid against the cold. "You'll freeze out here." She approached with 2 steaming cups, noting how his lips had taken on a blue tinge. "I'm fine," but his voice shook slightly, betraying him. Without a word, Alara unwound the cashmere scarf her father had given her for her last birthday, one of his final gifts before everything fell apart. The soft gray fabric still held traces of his cologne, a bittersweet reminder of better times. "I can't accept that." Kalen's eyes widened as she moved to wrap it around his neck. "It's too expensive, it's just a scarf." Her fingers brushed his throat as she adjusted the fabric, and she felt his sharp intake of breath. "Besides, it looks better on you." The lie came easily. The scarf had been precious to her, but seeing Kalen warm and protected felt more important than clinging to memories. "Alara," his hand covered hers, stilling her movements. "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to voice. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could see the way his eyes had darkened with something deeper than gratitude. "Because everyone deserves kindness," she whispered, but they both knew it was more than that. From that night forward, their relationship shifted into something neither could define. Kalen began walking her home after she closed the shop, their conversations flowing from literature to dreams, to the small observations that revealed their souls. He spoke of places he'd traveled with a detail that suggested first-hand experience, yet never explained how a homeless man had seen the northern lights in Iceland, or tasted authentic pasta in a hidden Roman trattoria. "You're different when you talk about those places," Elara observed one evening, as they strolled through Central Park. "Your whole face changes." Kalen's step faltered almost imperceptibly. "Different how?" "Sadder. Like you're remembering something beautiful that you lost." He stopped walking entirely, turning to face her under a street lamp that cast golden light across his features. For a moment she thought he might tell her something important, something real. Instead, he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe I'm just remembering what it feels like to be happy." The touch sent electricity through her entire body. They stood frozen, the city moving around them while they existed in their own bubble of possibility. "Elara, I need to tell you something." "There you are." Jessica's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Elara's best friend appeared on the path, her expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. "I've been looking everywhere for you." The spell broke. Kalen stepped back, his hand falling to his side as Jessica's gaze swept over him with obvious judgment. "Jess, this is Kalen." "Kalen, my friend Jessica, the homeless guy you've been talking about." Jessica's tone could have frozen fire. "Elara, we need to talk. Privately." He walked away before she could protest, leaving her standing with Jessica's disapproving stare. "Are you out of your mind?" Jessica grabbed her arm. "Elara, he could be dangerous. You don't know anything about him. I know he's kind and intelligent and homeless, and probably mentally ill or addicted to something. Normal people don't just sit on benches all day writing in journals. Normal people don't show compassion to strangers either, apparently." Elara jerked her arm free. "You don't know him, Jess. Neither do you, that's the point. Where does he sleep? What does he do for money? Why won't he tell you his last name?" The questions hit too close to truths Elara had been avoiding. She didn't know those things about Kalen, but she knew how he made her feel, alive, valued, understood in ways she'd never experienced. "I don't care about those things." "Well, you should. Your father trusted the wrong people, and look what happened. Don't make the same mistake." The comparison to her father's downfall stung because it carried a grain of truth. But this was different. Kalen was different. "My father was destroyed by people in expensive suits who smiled while they stabbed him in the back. Kalen has never been anything but honest with me." "Honest?" Jessica laughed bitterly. "Elara, you're falling for a fantasy. Wake up before you get hurt." That night, Elara lay awake replaying Jessica's words. Her friend meant well, but she didn't understand. Couldn't understand the way Kalen looked at her like she was something precious, or how his stories painted worlds where love conquered all obstacles. The next evening, she found him waiting on their bench with a single white rose. "Where did you get this?" She accepted the flower, inhaling its delicate fragrance. "I have my ways." His smile was mysterious, almost sad. "Elara, about last night, my friend was out of line. I'm sorry. She cares about you. She's not wrong to be concerned. She doesn't know you like I do you?" The question came out raw, vulnerable. "Know me, I mean?" Elara studied his face in the lamplight, seeing the conflict warring in his expression. "I know you have secrets. I know you're running from something or someone. I know you're educated and well-traveled despite your circumstances." She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "I also know you're the first person in 3 years to make me feel like myself again." Elara. Her name came out like a prayer. "I don't care about your secrets, Kalen. I care about you." Something broke in his expression. Before she could process what was happening, his hands framed her face and his lips found hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, filled with months of suppressed longing and unspoken truths. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Come home with me," she whispered against his lips. "I can't. You don't understand." "Then help me understand, but don't push me away. Not tonight." The war in his eyes was visible, a desire battling with something that looked like guilt. Finally, desire won. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with flowers and soft lighting that made everything feel intimate. Kalen moved through the space like he was memorizing it, his fingers trailing over her books, her photographs, the small mementos that told the story of her life. "You're beautiful," he said, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a picture of her with her father, both of them laughing at some long-forgotten joke. "He would have liked you." She moved to stand beside him. "He always said you could judge a person's character by how they treated those who couldn't help them in return." Kalen's jaw tightened. What if he was wrong? What if someone's kindness was just another form of deception? Is that what this is? She turned to face him fully. Deception? No. The word came out fierce, certain. "This is the most real thing in my life." He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation. They moved together with the desperate urgency of people who'd been starving without realizing it. Every touch, every whispered endearment, every moment of connection felt like coming home. Later, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Kalen traced patterns on her bare shoulder with trembling fingers. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too." But even as she said the words, she felt him tense beside her. When she turned to look at him, his eyes were fixed on the ceiling, his expression tortured. "What is it?" "Nothing." He pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her hair. "Just promise me something, anything. Remember this moment. Remember how you feel right now before—" He stopped himself. "Before what? Before the world tries to tell you it's wrong." She wanted to ask what he meant, but exhaustion was pulling her under. As she drifted off to sleep in his arms, she missed a single tear that tracked down his cheek. Kalen lay awake until dawn, memorizing the feel of her against him, the sound of her breathing, the trust she'd given him so freely. Tomorrow he would have to face the board meeting that would determine the fate of Martinez Construction's remaining assets. Tomorrow he would have to decide whether to honor his grandfather's ruthless legacy or forge a different path. Tomorrow he would have to choose between the empire he'd inherited and the woman he loved. But tonight, he allowed himself to pretend that love was enough. Have you ever defied everyone's advice for love? Comment below with your story while you watch what happens next. And if you're rooting for Alara and Kalen, subscribe to Rich Billionaire Romance Stories now so you don't miss our next passionate tale. The bench was empty. Alara stood across the street from Petals and Dreams, 2 cups of cocoa growing cold in her hands as she stared at the vacant spot where Kalen should have been. For 6 months he'd been there every morning at 8:30 sharp, journal in hand, ready with a smile that made her entire day brighter. Today, nothing. Maybe he's just running late, she murmured to herself, settling onto the bench to wait. The November morning bit through her coat, but she barely noticed the cold. Her body still hummed with memories of the night before, his hands on her skin, his whispered declarations of love, the way he'd held her like she was something infinitely precious. 9 o'clock came and went, then 10. By 11, the cocoa had gone stone cold, and a knot of worry had formed in her stomach. She spent her lunch break walking the surrounding blocks, checking every coffee shop, every park, every place they'd shared together. Nothing. It was as if Kalen had simply vanished into thin air. He'll be back tomorrow, she told herself, as she returned to the shop. He probably just had something to take care of. But tomorrow came, and the bench remained empty. So did the day after that, and the day after that. By the end of the week, Alara's worry had transformed into something sharper, more painful. She found herself making excuses to walk past the community center where Colin had claimed to volunteer, only to discover that no one by that name had ever worked there. "Excuse me?" she asked the receptionist, showing her a photo she'd taken of Kalen on her phone. "Have you seen this man? He said he volunteered here." The woman studied the image, frowning. "I'm sorry, but I've never seen him before. Are you sure he said this location?" Alara's heart sank. Another lie. Another piece of the man she loved that turned out to be fiction. 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4. The empty bench became a daily torment, a reminder of how completely someone could disappear from your life without warning. Alara threw herself into work, creating increasingly elaborate arrangements, as if beauty could somehow fill the void Kaylin had left behind. "You look terrible," Jessica observed one afternoon, finding Alara hunched over a wedding bouquet with dark circles under her eyes. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" "I'm fine." Alara's hands shook slightly as she adjusted a rose stem. "Just tired. This is about him, isn't it? The homeless guy who disappeared." The casual dismissal in Jessica's tone made Alara's temper flare. His name was Kaylin, and he didn't just disappear. Something must have happened to him, or he moved on to his next mark. "Alara, I know you don't want to hear this, but maybe this is for the best. You were getting too attached to someone you barely knew." "I knew him." The words came out fierce, desperate. "I knew his laugh and his stories, and the way he looked at the world like it was full of magic. I knew how gentle his hands were, and how he made me feel like I mattered. You knew what he wanted you to know. There's a difference." That night, Alara sat in her apartment surrounded by the small gifts Kaylin had given her over the months. Pressed flowers, handwritten poems, a smooth stone he'd found that reminded him of her eyes. Each item felt like evidence of something real, something that couldn't have been entirely fabricated. She was reaching for one of his poems when a wave of nausea hit her so suddenly she barely made it to the bathroom in time. As she knelt on the cold tile floor, a terrible possibility began to form in her mind. The pregnancy test she bought the next morning confirmed her fears. 2 pink lines stared back at her, undeniable in their clarity. She was pregnant with Kaylin's child, a child whose father had vanished without a trace. "This can't be happening," she whispered to her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been panic. The doctor's appointment a week later brought news that left her reeling. "Congratulations, Miss Martinez. You're carrying quadruplets." "I'm sorry, what?" Alara gripped the examination table, certain she'd misheard. 4 babies. It's quite rare, especially without fertility treatments. You're about 8 weeks along, and everything looks healthy so far." 4 babies. 4 tiny lives growing inside her, fathered by a man who disappeared like smoke. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years believing she'd never find love, never have a family, and now she was facing both in the most complicated way possible. "I need to think," she managed, accepting the ultrasound photos with trembling hands. That evening she sat on Kaylin's bench, their bench, staring at the grainy images that showed 4 tiny forms. Her hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach as she tried to process the magnitude of her situation. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked in the empty air. "How do I raise 4 children alone? How do I explain to them that their father was a beautiful lie?" But even as the questions overwhelmed her, a fierce protectiveness rose in her chest. These babies were hers, created from a love that had felt real even if everything else had been false. She would find a way to give them the life they deserved, with or without their father. "I'll love you enough for both of us," she whispered to her unborn children. "I promise." The decision to keep the babies came easily once she'd made it. The logistics would be terrifying. 4 cribs, 4 college funds, 4 futures to secure on a flower shop owner's income. But she'd figure it out. She had to. 3 months into her pregnancy, when her morning sickness had finally subsided and her belly was just beginning to show, the black car appeared. Alara was closing the shop when she noticed it. A sleek sedan with tinted windows parked across the street where Kaylin used to sit. Something about its presence made her skin crawl, though she couldn't say why. The car returned the next day, and the day after that. Always in the same spot, always with the engine running, as if whoever was inside was waiting for something. "Are you seeing this?" she asked Mrs. Chen, nodding toward the vehicle. "Seeing what, dear?" Alara looked again, but the car was gone. She began to wonder if pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. But that night, as she walked home from the shop, she caught a glimpse of the sedan following at a distance. When she turned to get a better look, it disappeared around a corner. Fear crept up her spine like ice water. Someone was watching her, and she had a terrible feeling it had something to do with Kaylin's disappearance. She quickened her pace, one hand instinctively covering her growing belly. Whatever was happening, whoever was in that car, she wouldn't let them hurt her babies. As she reached her apartment building, Alara made a decision. Tomorrow she will start looking for answers. She would find out who Kaylin really was and why he'd vanished from her life. She owed her children that much, the truth about their father, no matter how painful it might be. The black car sat at the end of her street until dawn, its occupant watching her windows with the patience of a predator. The private investigator's report felt like lead in Alara's hands. After weeks of following the black car and asking questions that led nowhere, she'd finally hired someone to find answers. The manila folder contained photographs, financial records, and a truth that made her legs weak. Kaylin Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, net worth $2.8 billion, the man she'd fallen in love with, the homeless storyteller who'd accepted her cocoa with grateful hands, owned half of Manhattan. "This has to be a mistake," she whispered, staring at a photograph of Kaylin in an expensive suit, shaking hands with the mayor. But those storm-gray eyes were unmistakable, even behind the confident mask of corporate power. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, N Blackwood Tower, penthouse. "Come alone, we need to talk." Kane Shane. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Alara's reflection stared back at her from the polished steel doors, 5 months pregnant now, her belly round with 4 growing lives, wearing her best dress that still couldn't hide her flower shop origins. She looked exactly like what she was, a working-class woman about to confront a billionaire who'd played her for a fool. The penthouse doors opened to reveal a space that belonged in architectural magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city sprawling below, while modern art and designer furniture spoke of wealth beyond her comprehension. And there, standing with his back to her, was the man she'd thought she knew. Gone were the worn jeans and mended jacket. Kaylin wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, his dark hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. When he turned to face her, she saw the homeless storyteller she'd loved warring with the corporate titan he actually was. "Hello, Alara. Don't..." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "Don't you dare use that gentle voice with me. Not when you're standing there in a suit that costs more than I make in 6 months. Pain flashed across his features. "I know how this looks. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a billionaire decided to play dress-up and see how the other half lives. Was I your charity case, Kaylin? Your little social experiment? Then explain it to me. Explain why you let me buy you coffee when you could afford to buy the entire cafe. Explain why you sat on that bench for months, writing in your journal like some tortured artist, when you have an empire to run." Kaylin's jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw the vulnerability she remembered from their quiet mornings together. "Because I was dying." The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. "What? Not literally, but the man I was becoming, the man my grandfather groomed me to be, was killing everything good inside me. Ruthless, calculating, seeing people as assets to be acquired, or obstacles to be removed." He moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. 3 years ago, I destroyed a small construction company. Systematically, deliberately. It was just business to me. Alara's blood turned to ice. What was the company's name? Martinez Construction. The words hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling, her mind reeling with the implications. "You killed my father." "I didn't know." His voice broke. "I swear to you, Alara, I didn't know who you were when we met. It wasn't until weeks later that I realized." "You knew." The accusation tore from her throat. "You knew, and you kept lying to me. You let me fall in love with you while knowing you were the reason my father died. I tried to stay away. After I figured out who you were, I tried to disappear from your life, but I couldn't." He turned to face her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was already in love with you." "Love?" She laughed bitterly. "You don't know what that word means. Love doesn't destroy someone's family and then seduce their daughter." "You're right. The man who destroyed your father's company doesn't know how to love, but the man who sat on that bench, who learned to see the world through your eyes, he loves you more than his own life." "Stop." She pressed her hands to her ears, unable to bear the sincerity in his voice. "Just stop. I can't do this. Alara, please. Let me explain everything. The disguise, the deception. It all started because I was searching for something real, something that wasn't tainted by my money or my name. And you found it by lying to me? I found it by becoming the man I was meant to be before wealth and power corrupted me. With you, I remembered what it felt like to be human, to care about someone more than profit margins and market shares." She wanted to hate him. Every rational part of her mind screamed that she should walk away, should protect herself and her children from this man who'd already caused her family so much pain. But her heart, her traitorous, foolish heart, still recognized the gentleness in his eyes, the vulnerability he'd shown her during those precious months. "I'm pregnant," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Kaylin went very still. "What?" "5 months. With your children." She placed both hands on her belly, a protective gesture that had become instinctive. "Did you know that too? Was this part of your plan?" "No," the word came out strangled. "Alara, I had no idea. Children? 4 of them. Quadruplets." She watched his face drain of color. "So congratulations, Mr. Blackwood. Your little experiment was more successful than you imagined." He sank into a chair as if his legs had given out. "4 babies. Don't worry. I'm not asking for anything from you. I've managed this long without knowing who you really were. I can manage the rest. You think I'd abandon you? Abandon them?" He looked up at her with something that might have been horror. "Alara, whatever else you believe about me, you have to know I would never. I don't know anything about you." The admission hurt more than she'd expected. "The man I fell in love with doesn't exist. He was just a costume you wore when you got bored with being rich. He exists." Kaylin stood, moving toward her with careful steps. "He exists in every moment I spend with you. In every story I told, every laugh we shared, every night I held you in my arms. The money, the company, the suits, those are the costumes. The man who loves you is real. How can I believe that? How can I trust anything you say when your entire relationship with me was built on lies? Because I'm telling you the truth now. Because I'm risking everything. My reputation, my company, my family's legacy, to be honest with you." He stopped just out of reach, his hands clenched at his sides. "Because I love you enough to let you walk away, if that's what you need to do." The offer hung between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Alara studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this was just another performance. Instead, she saw the man who'd brought her flowers stolen from his own corporate gardens, who'd listened to her dreams with the attention of someone who found them precious. "I need time," she whispered finally. "I need to think about what this means for my children." "Our children," he corrected softly. "I don't know if they're ours anymore. I don't know if we're anything anymore." The pain that crossed his features was so raw it made her chest ache, but she couldn't let sympathy override her need to protect the 4 lives growing inside her. "I'll wait." he said simply. However long you need. I'll wait. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her at the door. Alara? The man on the bench. He's still here. He's still yours if you want him. She didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see the hope and desperation in his eyes. But as the elevator carried her away from his world of glass and steel, she pressed her hand to her belly and wondered if love really could survive the weight of so many lies. Would you forgive this deception? Like this video if you believe love is worth the risk. Share it with someone who needs to hear that real love sees beyond the surface. Rich Billionaire Romance Stories brings you the most captivating love stories every week. Make sure you're subscribed. 2 weeks of silence stretched between them like a chasm. Alara threw herself into work at the flower shop, her hands moving automatically through arrangements while her mind churned with impossible decisions. The weight of 4 growing lives made every choice feel monumental, every emotion amplified by hormones and heartbreak. She was struggling to lift a heavy bucket of water when strong hands appeared beside hers. Let me, Kaylin's voice was quiet, careful. She looked up to find him in jeans and a simple sweater, not the homeless costume he'd worn before, but not the corporate armor either. Something in between, something real. What are you doing here? Her voice came out breathier than she'd intended, the pregnancy making even simple tasks exhausting. You shouldn't be lifting heavy things, not with 4 babies. He took the bucket from her hands, his fingers brushing hers in the process. I've been reading about multiple pregnancies, the risks, the precautions. You've been reading about pregnancy? The surprise in her voice made him flush slightly. I bought every book I could find. Did you know that quadruplet pregnancies require specialized care? That you'll need to see a maternal fetal medicine specialist? That bed rest might be necessary in the 3rd trimester? Despite everything, warmth bloomed in her chest at his obvious concern. I have a doctor, Kaylin, Dr. Morrison at the community clinic. I know. At her sharp look he held up his hands. I'm not stalking you. I wanted to make sure you were getting the best care possible. And you think my doctor isn't good enough because she doesn't charge billionaire prices? No. His response was immediate, firm. Dr. Morrison is excellent. But carrying quadruplets is high risk. You need a team of specialists, advanced monitoring equipment, a hospital with a level 4 NICU, in case the babies come early. The clinical details made her stomach clench with anxiety she'd been trying to ignore. I can't afford. I can. The words hung between them, loaded with implications. Not as some kind of payment or manipulation. As the father of those babies. As someone who loves you both. All 5 of us, she corrected automatically, then caught herself. I mean, all 5 of you. His smile was soft, wondering. I still can't quite believe it. 4 babies. They stood in the flower shop surrounded by blooms, and the scent of growing things, the weight of their complicated situation settling around them like morning mist. I don't know how to do this, Alara admitted finally. How to separate the man I fell in love with from the man who destroyed my father. How to trust you with my children's future when I don't even know who you really are. Then let me show you. He stepped closer, his eyes intense with purpose. Not with money or grand gestures. Let me show you who I am when I'm not trying to be anyone else. Over the following weeks, Kaylin became a constant, quiet presence in her life. He appeared at the flower shop each morning, not to sit on the bench across the street, but to help with the heavy lifting her growing belly made impossible. He drove her to doctor's appointments in a modest sedan, not the luxury cars she'd expected, and sat in waiting rooms reading pregnancy books with the dedication of a scholar. Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, Dr. Morrison noted during a routine checkup. Nothing dangerous yet, but we'll need to monitor it closely. Alara felt Kaylin tense beside her, his hand finding hers on the examination table. What does that mean for the babies? He asked, his voice tight with concern. It means we watch carefully and make adjustments as needed. Reduced stress, proper nutrition, Adequate rest. Dr. Morrison's gaze moved between them. Having support during a high-risk pregnancy makes a significant difference. That evening, Kaylin appeared at her apartment with grocery bags full of foods rich in protein and folate, along with a pregnancy pillow that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. "You don't have to take care of me," Alara protested, as he unpacked organic vegetables and prenatal vitamins. "I want to." He paused in his unpacking, meeting her eyes. "I know I can't undo the past. I can't bring your father back or erase the pain my family's company caused yours, but I can make sure you and our children have everything you need." "Our children." She tested the words, surprised by how natural they sounded. "When did I start thinking of them that way again?" When you realize that love isn't about perfection, it's about choosing each other despite the flaws. The morning sickness that had plagued her early pregnancy returned with a vengeance as she entered her second trimester, intensified by carrying multiples. Kaylin held her hair back during the worst episodes, brought her ginger tea and crackers, and never once complained about the 3 a.m. phone calls when nausea left her crying and exhausted. "This is not glamorous," she gasped one particularly bad morning, slumped on her bathroom floor. "Neither is love, most of the time." He dampened a washcloth with cool water, pressing it gently to her forehead. "But it's real, and real is better than perfect." Slowly, carefully, they began building something new from the ruins of their deception. Kaylin showed her the man behind the corporate mask, someone who'd grown up lonely despite his wealth, who'd learned to see people as transactions because that's how he'd been taught to survive. The homeless persona hadn't been entirely false. It had been his attempt to rediscover the humanity his upbringing had stripped away. "I was lost," he admitted one evening, as they assembled the first of 4 cribs in her small apartment. "I had everything money could buy, and nothing that mattered. Then I met a woman who saw beauty in broken things, and she taught me how to be whole again." "I'm still angry," Alara said, tightening a screw with perhaps more force than necessary, "about the lies about my father, about the fact that you let me worry about affording prenatal vitamins while sitting on billions. You should be angry. I would be, but I'm also—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm also grateful. For the man you became with me. For the father you're already proving to be." At 24 weeks, when an ultrasound revealed 4 healthy babies, 2 boys and 2 girls, Kaylin cried openly in the darkened examination room. "They're perfect," he whispered, his hand covering hers on her rounded belly. "They're ours," she replied, and for the first time since learning his true identity, she meant it completely. The flower shop became their neutral ground, the place where they learned to be partners rather than lovers haunted by deception. Kaylin's business acumen helped her streamline operations and increase profits, while her creativity and warmth reminded him why he'd fallen in love with life again. "We're going to need a bigger place," he observed one afternoon, watching her navigate between flower buckets with her expanding belly. "I know. I've been looking at apartments, but with 4 babies coming, move in with me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and risk. "Kaylin, not the penthouse. I bought a house in Brooklyn, with a garden where you can grow flowers and enough bedrooms for our family." He paused, vulnerability creeping into his voice. "If you want to be a family," looking at this man who'd learned to love through her eyes, who'd chosen truth over comfort and partnership over control, Alara felt the last walls around her heart begin to crumble. "Show me the house," she said softly. "What would you do if you discovered your partner had been hiding their identity?" At 34 weeks, Alara's water broke during the morning rush at the flower shop. "Kaylin," she gasped into her phone, gripping the counter as the first contraction hit. "It's time." He arrived in 7 minutes, a feat that should have been impossible given Manhattan traffic. But desperation had a way of bending the laws of physics. Alara was doubled over behind the register, Mrs. Chen fluttering around her like a worried bird. "The hospital bag is in the car," Kaylin said, his voice steady despite the panic in his eyes. Dr. Morrison is meeting us there. Everything's going to be fine. 4 babies at 34 weeks, Alara panted as another contraction seized her. This is not fine. This is terrifying. Hey! He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. Remember what you told me about flowers? Sometimes the most beautiful blooms come from the most challenging conditions. Our babies are fighters just like their mother. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of contractions and traffic lights that seemed determined to stay red. Kaylin held her hand, murmuring reassurances, while his free hand gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, the nurse at the maternity ward, looked confused when they arrived. We have you down for a scheduled C-section next week. Plans changed, Alara managed between breaths. Babies don't read calendars. The next few hours dissolved into controlled chaos. The delivery room filled with medical staff, neonatologists, nurses, anesthesiologists, all preparing for the arrival of 4 premature babies. Kaylin stayed by her side through it all, his expensive suit replaced by surgical scrubs, his billionaire confidence transformed into the raw vulnerability of an expectant father. I can see the first head, Dr. Morrison announced. Here we go. Baby A arrived at 2:47 p.m., a tiny girl with a powerful cry that filled the room with hope. Baby B followed 3 minutes later, a boy who entered the world quietly, his small fists already clenched with determination. Baby C, another girl, made her appearance at 2:53, while Baby D, the final boy, took his time, arriving at 2:58, with what the nurses would later describe as fashionably late timing. 4 healthy babies, Dr. Morrison announced, exhaustion and joy mingling in her voice. Breathing on their own, good color, strong heartbeats. They'll need some time in the NICU for monitoring, but they're fighters. Alara collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as she listened to the symphony of 4 different cries. Kaylin stood frozen beside her, staring at the tiny bundles being examined by the medical team. Go, she whispered, squeezing his hand. Go meet your children. He approached the warming tables with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. 4 perfect babies, each weighing just over 4 pounds, each a miracle of timing and love and stubborn determination to enter the world together. They're so small, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. But perfect, the neonatologist assured him. All their vital signs are strong. You have 4 very healthy babies here. Later, when Alara had been moved to recovery and the babies were settled in the NICU, they sat together in the quiet hospital room, finally able to process what had just happened. We need names, Alara said, studying the photos the nurses had taken. I can't keep calling them baby A through D. Kaylin pulled out his phone, showing her a list he'd been working on for weeks. I had some thoughts, but I wanted to discuss them with you. Let me guess, family names? Traditional billionaire monikers? Actually, no, he looked almost shy. I was thinking about the stories I used to tell you, about the meanings behind things. They spent the next hour going through possibilities, each name carrying weight and significance. For their firstborn daughter, they chose Luna, for the moon that had witnessed their first kiss. Their eldest son became Gabriel, meaning God's strength, a tribute to the courage it had taken to build their love from deception and truth. Their second daughter they named Iris, after the flower that symbolized hope and the rainbow that appears after storms. Their youngest son became Theodore, gift of God, because his late arrival had given them those precious extra minutes to savor becoming parents. Luna, Gabriel, Iris, and Theodore Blackwood, Kaylin said, testing the names. It sounds like the beginning of a fairy tale, or the end of one, Alara replied, watching him through the hospital room window as he stood vigil outside the NICU. The part where the prince learns that real kingdoms aren't built on power, but on love. Over the next 2 weeks, as their babies grew stronger in the NICU, Alara watched Kaylin transform before her eyes. The corporate titan who'd once commanded boardrooms with ruthless efficiency now spent hours learning to change diapers the size of his palm and mastering the art of kangaroo care. He read to their children from the same journal where he'd once written stories about strangers, his voice soft with wonder as he described the world they'd soon explore together. "You're different," she observed one evening as he carefully fed Gabriel from a tiny bottle. "How so?" "Gentler, more present. Like you've finally figured out what matters." "I have." He looked up from their son's serious face. "It's not the empire I inherited, or the money in my accounts, it's these 4 perfect people we made together. The woman who taught me how to love without conditions. The day they brought the babies home to the Brooklyn house Kaylin had bought, a sprawling Victorian with a garden where Alara could grow flowers and enough bedrooms for their expanding family, felt like the true beginning of their story." "Welcome home," Kaylin whispered as they stood in the nursery, 4 cribs arranged in a semicircle, each one holding a sleeping miracle. Alara leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion and joy warring in her chest. "I never thought I'd have this. A family, a home, someone who loves me enough to become a better person. I never thought I deserved it," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "But you taught me that love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing each other. Every day, despite our flaws." That first night, as they took turns with feedings and diaper changes, moving through their new routine with the awkward grace of first-time parents, Alara felt the last pieces of her broken heart finally heal. The man who'd once destroyed her father's company now sang lullabies to their children in the early morning hours. The billionaire who'd hidden behind a homeless disguise now wore spit up on his shoulder like a badge of honor. Love, she realized, wasn't about the person you thought you were getting. It was about the person you chose to become together. 5 years later, the Brooklyn house buzzed with the controlled chaos that only 4 kindergartners could create. Luna sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her dark hair in pigtails as she carefully arranged her toy horses in a perfect line. Gabriel hunched over a puzzle, his brow furrowed in concentration that reminded Alara painfully of his father. Iris spun in circles until she collapsed in giggles, while Theodore, always the observer, watched his siblings with the quiet intensity of someone collecting stories. "Daddy, tell us about the bench," Luna demanded as Kaylin entered the room, his tie loosened after a day of board meetings. Despite his wealth, he'd insisted on keeping normal bedtimes and family dinners, treating his empire as a job rather than an identity. "Which bench story do you want?" Kaylin settled onto the couch, and all 4 children immediately gravitated toward him like flowers turning towards sunlight. "The one where you met Mommy," Gabriel said, abandoning his puzzle. "But tell it right this time." Alara looked up from the kitchen where she was preparing their evening snack, smiling at the familiar request. Their children had heard various versions of their parents' love story, but they always sensed there were missing pieces, gaps in the narrative that didn't quite add up. "Well," Kaylin began, lifting Iris onto his lap while the others settled around his feet, "once upon a time, there was a very foolish man who had forgotten how to be kind." "Was he mean?" Theodore asked, his voice small. "Not mean exactly, just lost. He had everything money could buy but nothing that mattered. So he decided to sit on a bench and watch the world, hoping to remember what he'd forgotten. And then Mommy brought him cocoa." Luna clapped her hands, delighted by this part of the story. She did, even though she didn't know him, even though he looked like someone who couldn't afford his own coffee. She shared her grandmother's recipe because she saw someone who needed kindness. Alara joined them in the living room, settling beside Colin as their children listened with rapt attention. Even after 5 years of marriage, she still felt that flutter of recognition when he looked at her, the same wonder she'd felt when a homeless storyteller had seen straight into her soul. "But why were you on the bench, Daddy?" Gabriel pressed. "Why weren't you at work?" Kaylin and Alara exchanged a look. They'd agreed to tell their children the truth when they were old enough to understand, but 5 seemed too young for corporate espionage and family destruction. Sometimes grown-ups need to step away from their regular lives to figure out who they really want to be, Alara said carefully. Your daddy was trying to become the best version of himself. Did it work? Iris asked, her small hand patting Kaylin's cheek. What do you think? He caught her hand and kissed her palm. Do you think I'm a good daddy? The best daddy, all 4 children chorused, and Alara felt her heart swell with the familiar ache of overwhelming love. Later, after baths and bedtime stories, and the elaborate ritual of tucking 4 children into their beds, Alara and Kaylin sat in their garden. The flower beds she'd planted bloomed in careful abundance, a riot of color and fragrance that had become her signature throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson from down the street stopped by today, Alara mentioned, pulling weeds from around the roses. Her husband lost his job, and she was asking about work at the flower shop. And I hired her. Part-time, but it's something. She looked up at him. I also may have mentioned that Blackwood Industries has an excellent job placement program for displaced workers. Kaylin smiled, the expression transforming his face the same way it had 5 years ago. I'll make some calls tomorrow. You know what I love most about our story? Alara asked, settling beside him on the garden bench they'd installed, a replica of the one where they'd first met. What's that? It's not really about the deception or the money, or even the dramatic revelation. It's about 2 people who chose to see the best in each other, even when it was hard. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts, Kaylin agreed, pulling her closer. That's when love matters most. From the house came the sound of small feet on hardwood floors. Theodore, most likely, sneaking out of bed for one more glass of water or one more hug. Their life was beautifully imperfect, filled with sleepless nights and sticky fingers, and the constant joyful chaos of raising 4 strong-willed children. Do you ever regret it? Alara asked. Giving up the corporate shark persona for this domestic madness? Never. His answer was immediate, certain. I spent 30 years building an empire. But this, he gestured toward the house where their children slept, toward the garden where love had taken root and bloomed, toward the woman who taught him that the greatest treasures couldn't be bought. This is my real kingdom. Do you believe true love can overcome any deception? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Rich Billionaire Romance Stories for more tales about love that defies expectations. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And remember, Rich Billionaire Romance Stories uploads new passionate tales every week. Sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as ordinary moments.